Hello, freaks. You should step back. And this is a narrative that gets repeated over and over again in the social justice warrior culture. This idea that you should just step back and let these others talk because they understand more.
And the others are always other group members,
Yes,
right? And somehow their discourse is to be privileged in reverse because hypothetically they're a member of an oppressed class.
Right.
Of course, and you can multiply the numbers of oppressed classes ad nauseum, which is another part of the problem.
Yeah, like the idea is that in giving them privilege because they have been marginalized, you will balance things out. You will somehow or another reverse the scale.
And that's another example of the class-based guilt idea. You know, it doesn't seem to me self-evident that I'm to blame for slavery, for example. I mean,
my brother Jordan Peterson has a way with words. It doesn't seem to me self-evident that I am to blame for slavery. This dude's a daggone poet, man, who speaks like that. He's extremely intelligent, man, but he's kind. Like, it doesn't seem like he's ever punched anybody. He seemed like a really nice guy. He doesn't seem weak. He just seemed like a nice guy.
It doesn't seem to me self-evident that I'm to blame for slavery, for example. I mean, being a Canadian, it's a slightly different situation, I suppose. But the idea that as a member of a culture that you're somehow responsible for the past sins of that culture, let's say, it's a very, very anti-Western ethos. It goes along with this idea of class guilt.
You know what? I've seen people get their tails beat for something that their friend, their cousin, their brother, or their sister did to someone else. And someone else, because they couldn't catch the other person or because they feared that other person, they were able to cause a little bit of harm to the ones that they could reach. And that's sometimes that's the mentality of victims. Victims always, if there's nothing else to think about, I can understand the whole victimhood way of thinking because that does happen. If there's no positivity on the horizon, nothing that's looking up that can pull them away from whatever hurt and harm they've been in, then they're going to look to blame someone else. And that ease, it eases you a little bit. It's like a little drug, like, okay, it gives you a little boost. Okay, it's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault because that, and because this.
Because your group membership is the most important thing. If your group at some point in the past did something reprehensible, which of course every group has done, that's for sure, then you are de facto responsible in the present for that.
How do you think we got to this point where people are repeating these patterns that were ultimately incredibly unsuccessful and dangerous and deadly in the past, like Marxism, for example? Like, people proudly proclaim themselves as having Marxist ideology.
One in five social scientists claims to be a Marxist.
How do they not understand the history? Well, why don't you fill people in on how that went bad?
Well, the estimates vary, but in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 1959, somewhere between 30 and 50 million people were killed in internal oppression alone. So that's pretty bad. And then in China, which was operating under exactly the same principles, it might have been up to 100 million killed during Mao's time. And of course, Mao is still revered in China, appallingly enough. And Vietnam and Cambodia, and wherever these ideas were implemented, Cuba, wherever these ideas were implemented, the result was absolute mayhem. And I think what happened is that the Marxist ideas are actually quite attractive if you're an intellectual and if you're, I would say, if you're tilted towards compassion from a personality perspective, because they're based on doctrines like from each according to his ability to each according to his need. And the idea that you should fulfill people's needs or that society should fulfill people's needs is on the surface of it an attractive idea. Of course, the problem is who gets to define the needs and who gets to define the abilities. And
that's always a point that we need to consider. Who gets to define? The same thing that happened with free speech. Who gets to define what's free speech and what's not if you're going to regulate it? So same thing with this.
That really is a big problem. And
that really is
then those ideas were put into practice first in the Soviet Union, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who wrote the Gulag Archipelago, did a very lovely job of detailing in horrifying detail how those initial doctrines were transformed into legislation, and then how those legislation was transformed into endless genocide, essentially, and almost destroyed the world. Let's not forget that. Partly with the help of Castro, who just died. The doctrines, when put into into actual practice, were murderous instantaneously. Now, what happened? There were always apologists for the left in the West, especially in France, especially among the French intellectuals, especially in the late 1960s. And then when all of the information about what was happening in the Soviet Union came flooding forward, and that culminated, say, about 1973, when Solzhenitsyn's book was published, the French intellectuals changed their tune. Instead of agitating on the part of the working class, which allied them with murderous Marxists, they switched and started to talk about power and to talk about group identity. It was like a sleight of hand. The underlying pathological philosophy remained exactly the same, but the surface nomenclature changed, and that became very attractive. And at the same time, the Soviet Union dissolved. And so one of the problems I think we have now, a perverse problem, is that these Marxist ideas are very attractive to compassionate intellectuals, and we don't have good, bad examples like the Soviet Union around that everybody can point to and go, yeah, well, that sounds good, but, you know, what about the murderous death camps and the millions of people who are suffering? We still have North Korea, but, you know, people treat North Korea like it's a joke instead of like it's an exemplar of a pathological system. And people have no historical memory, like my students. And that's partly because they're taught so badly in schools, is they have no idea what happened in the Soviet Union. They have absolutely no idea. They know a little bit about the Second World War, maybe. And, of course, people generally know about the Holocaust, but they have no idea what happened in the Soviet Union. So they have no idea where these ideas could lead. And the universities and the high schools are so full of people who are radically left-leaning that the students are never taught any proper history. You know, they're taught about the evils of capitalism. And, you know, I mean, it's not like any system is perfect, but there's difference between imperfect and consciously murderous.
This dude is a beast, man. One thing that I didn't always have regrets. I have one now. I believe I have one now, and that's that I didn't take college seriously. I didn't take that opportunity seriously. I definitely should have. I did not understand how important knowledge was until here recently. I really didn't. This is crazy, man. But I'm enjoying the ride so far. I'm enjoying the ride.
I think one of the things that you just said that's very important is that it's attractive to compassionate intellectuals, people that without
Marxism.
really looking at what the potential for these laws and regulations, what the negative potential for them is, the underlying inclination to lean towards that is that you care about people and that you want people to be okay. And
you're kind of treating them like they're your children.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in an entirely sarcastic manner. It's reasonable in some sense to treat other people like people that you love, although it's not reasonable in very many other ways, which is why you don't invite every stranger on the street to come and live with you in your house. I mean, everybody puts up boundaries, and you have to do that. But
That's right.
And people,
And you don't just let anybody into your car. You go to the store and you see people standing out there ready to jump into your car and help you with some work or do something for you, or relax. Don't just bring just anybody into your daggone your private things.
everybody puts up boundaries, and you have to do that. But and people tend more than we ever expected, and I've done a lot of research in this in my lab, that people do tend to vote and think their temperament a lot more than anyone really realizes. And if you're kind, and that's your highest virtue, then you tend to treat people like they're kin, because that's what kind means, right? It's an extension of the word kin.
It is,
but that
isn't
doesn't
it?
work well in larger groups. You need other principles. And so you look at something like the idea of equity, which is equality of outcome rather than equality of opportunity. On the surface of it, it seems perfectly reasonable to say, well, if every resource isn't distributed absolutely equally to every group, then the system is unfair. And on the face of it, that's a reasonable proposition, but it falls apart under minimal examination. So here's something to think about for everyone who thinks that equality of an outcome is a good idea. It's like, why the hell are you striving for anything then? Because the reason anyone strives to better themselves or to develop a skill or to move forward in life at all is to produce inequality.
That is true. And if everyone are just being given the same exact thing, what's the point of going above and beyond? What's the point of doing your work at all? Like, you can sit on your hands and still be able to get what everyone else is getting. Yeah, that's a really good point. That's a really good point right there.
You're trying to rise above the mediocre masses every time you make an effort at anything. And so everything that we associate positive movement forward to or positive motivation is actually an attempt to render the world more unequal. Now, you're rendering it unequal in a just way, right? Because we might say, well, if you work really hard, you deserve an unequal outcome. Well, yeah, unless you want people to stop working hard. And that was the old joke in the Soviet Union, you know. They pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. So it's so thoughtless. That's the problem. Well, and it's also extremely annoying for people who've worked really hard and who've made the requisite sacrifices to become successful along some dimension, to have that immediately attributed to their oppression.
Yes.
And it's not obvious that that's something we want to do. It's like, for the social justice warrior types out there who might be listening, it's like, are you really willing to say that every single person who's accomplished something has done that as a consequence of oppression? That's again what the Soviets claimed with regards to the successful peasants just before the 1920s. It's like, well, the peasants weren't emancipated. They were serfs until about 30 years before that. They were serfs. They were basically slaves.
You know how good it makes someone feel when they find out that someone who's successful started out with money? Oh my God, yes, that makes me feel so good. Oh, now I know for a fact that they had a cheat code. They had a head start. I know that. That makes me feel good. Whenever someone sees someone who's accomplished a whole lot, most people want to know that this person had a head start. Because when they find out that this person had the same humble beginnings as them, they feel like they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing. Or they automatically assume that this person didn't live life. You're not living life. You're not happy. You're not having no fun. You're not having any fun. That's the only reason why you got so far ahead of me. I was having fun. I was living life. Let me borrow $15. Let me hold $20 into my next blessing. Huh? Let me hold like $19 into my next blessing. Because that's what comes up next. The person that did their work, paid attention, and really hustled and tried to strive to be the best that they could possibly be. Hey, those people are ahead. And the people who was living their life, having so much fun, not really concerned about all that other stuff, all that petty stuff. They missed the boat.
They were serfs until about 30 years before that. They were serfs. They were basically slaves. And some of them had clambered up to the point where maybe they owned their hut and a cow and could, employ someone. Well, the Soviet claim was, well, that's all theft. You got that all because you're an oppressor. And so then the Soviet intellectuals went into the villages, and just imagine how this happened. So imagine a village, a small town where everyone knows everybody, and there's maybe 10, 20 people there who are moderately successful. Okay, and so you can imagine that those 20 people have like 100 enemies at the bottom of the socioeconomic distribution, useless, horrible people who are jealous and resentful about the fact that these people have been successful.
Told y'all, man. Go ahead and tell it, Jordan. Told y'all. It's ridiculous. Person cannot achieve anything without having somebody looking at them like, man, what you do? Who did you have to have sex with in order to get to where you are? You only got that position because you like to kiss butt. You like to kiss people butt. You probably be snitching on us. All because they didn't do what they had to do. And they're still not doing what they have to do because they want to be able to blame somebody. They want to be able to blame somebody. I remember doing this. I had this conversation so many times in my old job. And whenever somebody has an opportunity, it's always because you know why, right? They this color right here. That's the problem. You know it ain't none of us. You know it ain't none of us. It's always, which is ridiculous because the people that I knew who was making the most money while at my old job, they were black. They look just like me. But whenever someone wants to complain, wants to hate on someone who's achieving and doing well, they go pulling out they go into their oppression handbag. You know, they like they wear like a belt, like they got 2 Colt 45s in them, man. You know what I mean?
Okay, so now the intellectuals come in and say, property is theft, success is oppression. And then they look for the people in the village who are willing to move against those 20 successful people. Well, those guys at the bottom, those 100 resentful, jealous, murderous people at the bottom, they're just waiting for an opportunity to go kick down some doors. And that's exactly what they did in the 1920s. And as I said, they wiped out all their productive peasants. And then 6 million Ukrainians starved to death. They had posters. The Soviets produced posters in the 1930s that said, wow, essentially, don't forget it's wrong to eat your children.
What? I just now did a video where the lady was talking about we need to eat our babies. We don't have any more CO2. We're running out of CO2. We need to eat the babies. There was a people before that actually ate their babies. Don't forget, do not eat your babies. Why do they have to warn anybody that?
So,
whoa.
Yeah, whoa. There's nothing about the there's nothing that you can imagine that's horrible enough so that it matched the reality of what happened in the Soviet Union between 1919 and 1959. And, you know, the West knew about this too. Early, Malcolm Muggeridge in the 30s was documenting for England, for English newspapers, exactly what was going on in the Soviet Union. The bloody intellectuals didn't admit it till the mid-70s, you know, with the exception of people like George Orwell.
Wow. That brother Jordan Peterson is that's a smart cat. And all he was doing was breaking down class-based guilt. Yeah. And he broke it all. He broke it down like that there. You saw him. You listened to him. You heard the same thing that I heard. The dude is a genius. Oh, you ain't heard about him yet? I'm sure you have. If you haven't, then you're about to. Huh? Say that twice. But I want to hear what you all have to say about this in the comments below. And if you have yet to hit that subscribe button, please make sure you do so on your way out the door. Once again, guys, I'm Van, and now we are all the LFR family, and I look forward to seeing you on the next video, hopefully inside the Patreon as well. Y'all have been amazing, man. Love y'all. Oh, and check out the Facebook group, LFR Family Live, and the Discord that's in the link inside of this video down here. Is in the link down in the description. Is a link down there. All right. And thank you all for the extra support y'all have been showing. Mean the world to me. Thank you so much. All right. I'm not gonna keep on saying thank you all the time because then I'm gonna really sound like somebody that people making fun of me. Man, you always thanking them white people. People are ignorant, bruh. I'll see y'all next time, man. Love y'all.